everyone, and welcome to Petworking, a podcast focused on pet care and animal health. I'm here today with Tina Owens, Senior Fellow of Regenerative Agriculture at Green America, also leading the Nutrient Density Alliance, which is a Green America initiative. Super excited to have Tina on the show. We had a chance to meet at the Pet Sustainability Coalition's Impact Unleashed conference a few weeks ago, and I was completely blown away by the presentation she delivered, and really wanted to get her on the show so that we all could become more enlightened consumers around a word that some of you may have heard already, but I think for a lot of people is more of a sustainability buzzword than something that they can actually identify tangible consumer and climate benefits with, and that's regenerative agriculture. Tina, thank you so much for joining us on Petworking, and maybe that's a great jumping off point once you've had a chance to introduce yourself is, can you tell us why regenerative agriculture is more than a sustainability buzzword?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you, Peter, for the introduction and for the invitation to talk further about this with your community. I'll just pause and mention a couple more words of introduction so folks know where I'm coming from. I spent almost 20 years working for two of the world's largest food companies on sustainability and regenerative initiatives since 2016 and part of the organic industry since 2008. So if people want to learn more, they can certainly look at my LinkedIn. And also we have a small farm here that we raise animals, heritage pastured animals for nutrient density outcomes using the practices of regenerative agriculture. So really looking to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. And regenerative agriculture goes beyond sustainability in that it is less about keeping things operating in the status quo in the face of climate change, and more about actively removing things that are negatively driving outcomes in the climate. And that is due to soil health. So regenerative agriculture principles at their base across most of the programs that you will learn about include things like cover crops, crop rotation, no and no-till, and animal or manure integration. But there's several programs that also go beyond that to include things like diversity, equity, inclusion, looking at systems of capital, looking at the consumer and their health, the downstream health impacts of the food that they're eating, or the downstream impacts of how fields are treated and as it relates to biodiversity above and below ground. And so it goes so much farther beyond what we've typically tended to think of as individual impacts of food, to look more at the systems level view for the globe on what's necessary for sustaining human life going forward. So happy to share a few more details about that so people feel like they can wrap their arms around it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe a great place to start is, when we think of regenerative agriculture, it is a agricultural practice that relies on low use of pesticides, low and no-till. And I think, for a lot of people, they can wrap their heads around that. I know personally, before seeing your presentation, that was where I was at, but I didn't understand, like you said, all the downstream effects. I put regenerative agriculture in the same bucket as organic or biodynamic, or, something that I might see on a package and be like, oh, that might be a little bit better for me. That might be a little bit better for the environment. Maybe I'll spend a little extra money and I'll get this product that was farmed using regenerative agriculture, or comes from meat that was raised on regenerative pasture land. But what you really highlighted, and I think is lost on so many people, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it hasn't been marketed to the consumer well enough yet, is that there are significant carbon reduction benefits that are associated with regenerative agriculture. Regenerative soils have greater potential for carbon sequestration. And then there's also the consumer benefit to you personally. So it's not just paying extra to help the planet, it's paying extra, or hopefully eventually paying the same amount of money to get a superior product in terms of its nutrient density. And to me, that was such an eye-opening moment, when you said, soil health and the nutrient density in the soil really translates up the food chain. And there are so many benefits, which I know you're going to get into, but I think that's found, to me, was the aha moment of pretty much the entire conference. Not that there weren't other great moments as well.
Yeah, well, and thanks for raising that, because it is something that we have yet to really bring the consumer in on for regenerative agriculture. And I would say, going back to how you originally prefaced this around certifications, the organic certification, the non-GMO project certification, those are really certifications of exclusion. So they're saying what to do, or what not to do within a specific supply web in order to achieve that front-facing pack for consumers. And farmers have also been trained to expect a higher premium when they're performing those practices for those certifications, because they typically have been on foods that command a higher price point for consumers. And so, some of this is going to stretch people's ways of thinking about the food system, because regenerative agriculture, when practiced to its fullest extent on many farms, actually drives a lower cost point for the farmers themselves and higher profitability, because they don't have so much going out to the middlemen for the off-farm inputs, because they're focused on recharging those natural cycles that existed in their soil before they started using synthetic inputs that essentially disrupted those cycles. And so you mentioned carbon, but one of the other big benefits is actually the water cycle. We need the water cycle before we can do the carbon cycle. If we can't grow any plants, then the carbon cycle is almost a moot point. And so driving the ability for the local water cycle and for water infiltration, for groundwater recharge, that can affect everything from people's wells to, whether or not it's actually raining in their region, depending on how bare the fields are. But back to the consumer's own specific outcome, through organic and non-GMO, we've tended to target a very specific cause-based consumer. And actually with regenerative agriculture, because the benefits flow through not just through the natural systems, but all the way through to the food outcomes themselves, we really can be focusing it on what the consumer wants to see around taste, health, quality, and nutrition. So instead of having to, have a strong held belief around what type of agricultural system I'm supporting, if instead I'm specifically interested in what's in it for me, for my fertility or my longevity or my kids' ADHD, or my type 2 diabetes, or if I'm looking to manage something that is a chronic illness or a metabolic syndrome that's leading to a chronic illness, nutrient density is where it's at. And because we're actually satiated by nutrients, not by calories. And so we've tended to think of this as a calorie is a calorie. And actually it quite matters the way that food was grown, the way that it was processed, how fresh it is when you're eating it, and what that means for the nutrition inherently within that food. And so it was the UNFAO in the Year of the Soil 2015 that first started publicly espousing the fact that there was peer-reviewed research showing that nutrient-depleted soils equal nutrient-depleted humans. And that is the basis of a lot of our epidemics in society, including obesity, because we are lacking in nutrients, and so our bodies are giving us these signals to eat, because they're missing critical nutrients. So it's not just people who are malnourished in a impoverished place or that have experienced drought. It's also those that have more access to food and maybe are eating more than they should, but actually aren't getting the nutrition that they would normally get from that food as you would have in generations in the past, because of the soil depletion. So I know I said a lot there, Peter. I'm curious to see what you want to unpack from that. Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, no, I mean that slide that you showed at Impact Unleashed, that nutrients drive satiety rather than calories. I think there's a lot to unpack there, and it has profound reverberations, across the food system, right? So it's not just me as a human being that I can eat more nutrient-dense foods and eat fewer calories and lose weight and be healthier. But there's also productivity in if the livestock I'm raising on regenerative pasture land, they theoretically can eat less grass than if they were on non-regenerative grassland, or if they were fed grain or hay, right? So that there's productivity gains that occur there. And then it flows up the food chain, and that, the livestock that are raised on regenerative pasture land are they themselves more nutrient dense. And so then you're getting, as you talked, that taste, quality, health, nutrition, you're eating better meat, you're able to eat less meat. And when we think about that, both in terms of the human food system as well as the pet food system, there are marked gains there when coupled with the carbon sequestration benefits and the other benefits of regenerative agriculture, the ability for regenerative soils to hold more water, promote greater water retention, as you mentioned with the water cycle. It seems like there's a big unlock here that is waiting to occur.
Yeah, so jumping in there, if folks listening to this are interested to hear more about the pastured animals' nutritional outcomes, I would encourage them to look at Food Animal Concerns Trust, FACT. They have a bibliography, a 24-page bibliography on all of the peer-reviewed research that is recent as last year, but dating back more than a decade, showing that the omega-3/6 fatty acid ratio and some of the other compounds that we need for human health are actually impacted via animals being on pasture, living more of a natural life. And then there's a cortisol effect where their stress level goes down, right? So you're not eating animals that have spent their entire life in a stressful system. You're eating animals that have actually spent their life on pasture the way that they're supposed to. And there's unfolding research coming into that area to talk about what the cortisol levels of animals mean for humans as they're ingesting them. But, there's a lot of tech that's playing a role in this too, of, wearables that let us know our metabolic response or our own cortisol levels or our type 2 diabetes and our sugar levels. There's just a lot of tech moving into this space. Some of it could even be wearables for animals to look at what their cortisol levels are as they go and live in these various systems that we have produced as humans in order to drive towards efficient food outcomes. So at the Nutrient Density Alliance, we tried to put together the business case specifically for brands that are working in the regenerative agriculture space. And so it's worth mentioning there's now $1 trillion worth of companies that say they're doing something around regenerative. 58 of the top 100 food companies on the planet have something to do with regenerative, either tied to their strategic business results or a pilot to say that they're testing it, or even just so they can use the buzzwords, right? And so making sure that the consumer gets a understanding of this and brings the top line growth alongside the investment these companies are making on back office, on procurement, on stakeholder management, on greenhouse gas reporting. And, they're currently kind of forgetting to behave like brands and actually bringing it to the consumer's door and letting them know what's happening there. So we strongly believe that the consumer is the balance point, letting farmers know that it's safe to move into regenerative agriculture, but also that the consumer has something they can get out of this system that is specific to their human health and that has yet to be brought to them through any of the other existing food systems. We want to make sure that all of that gets mapped together within the existing grocery and CPG space.
And I don't think anyone's really done it yet, right? I think, I know at Impact Unleashed, we were looking specifically at the pet industry, and you made some call outs to brands that are making mention of regenerative agriculture in their marketing. And some are even tying it to increased nutrient density. But I don't think anyone is going so far as to spell out that, look, if you're eating a more nutrient dense diet, you can eat fewer calories. If you're eating a more nutrient dense diet, you may experience better health. And, you were talking, it kind of gets back to the philosophy of Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. But I thought it was really interesting, how you mentioned the effects of cortisol from conventionally raised beef or other livestock, and that can kind of flow up the food chain and increase our stress and cortisol levels as humans if we're ingesting it from the animals that we're eating. Similarly, if we move that to regeneratively raised livestock, we're eliminating that cortisol, we're getting added nutrient benefits, and that would also play out for your pets as well. So you'd be getting healthier, less stressed pets. And we see so often now, that the calming trend, in terms of functional, treats or supplements, calming is year in and year out the number one indicator. And it makes you wonder, how much of this is coming from heightened cortisol levels in their foods.
Mm-hmm.
I think taking that step of illustrating to people, these are the benefits of eating a nutrient dense diet. And I know you had talked also about the fact that when we're thinking of nutrients, we may only be thinking about 1% of the total nutrients that are available to us. And regenerative agriculture could be giving us far more benefits than, the USDA is even, mapping on their nutrition labels.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute, because that's one of those groundbreaking, earth-shattering moments that when you get people to understand that this is where we're at and the precipice we're on of additional information, it opens up their mindset to a little bit more innovative thinking, I think, to somewhat break their faith and the current side panel process. So, what I had shared is that there's 150 compounds that the USDA tracks for nutrition that they consider as constituents in food or dietary supplements that are needed to meet basic human nutritional needs. But what we're finding is, the tools that we use to map human DNA and then the human microbiome are being turned on the world around us, including food. And so there was peer-reviewed research dating back about 4 years ago around the term nutritional dark matter, which was coined by Albert Laszlo Barabasi at Northeastern University, and he's also a lecturer at Harvard Medical. And in Nature Foods, they were espousing in the unmapped chemical complexity of our diet that there are 26,000 biochemicals in food. And if the USDA tracks 150 of them, that's less than 1%. It's 0.005 actually. And there are friends of mine who've since put out research that shows that there's a couple 100,000 biochemicals in food. And there are other friends of mine who would say, Tina, there are millions of biochemicals in food. And so this nutritional dark matter mapping process is giving us answers to questions we didn't know to ask until now. And AI is being paired with it to take those bioactive compounds that are being mapped and review them versus all of the existing human health research to make easier hypotheses about where those bioactives might actually drive a positive human health impact in order to enable human health trials to take place much faster. It used to take a decade of trying to isolate a single compound and doing a lot of laborious research about what that compound meant prior to going into extremely expensive human health trials. And now AI is able to speed that up. And so, this nutritional dark matter question of the other 99% that's in food, what I tell people is from now on until we get this, till we're to the other side of this paradigm shift, every time you look at a side panel in a box, I want you to tell yourself, I'm looking at science that is a century old. This is last century's understanding of vitamins and nutrients and calories. And the other 99% that's in this food matters for my health, and regenerative agriculture and agriculture itself, full stop, has an impact on whether or not the beneficial compounds or the anti-nutrients are in here in a way that impacts my human health all the way through to the microbiome of, my gut health and everything else, my pet's gut health. And so if people listening are interested in learning more about microbiome, human health, soil health, nutrient density, biodiversity above and below ground, there was actually this wonderful article that occurred in Eating Well from June of 2020 called Why You Need to Care About Healthy Soil. And it's one of the best articles that I've seen that's very consumer friendly, that helps you understand at a personal level why these things in soil health actually matter for your own health, your pet's health, your family's health. And people can go to our nutrientdensityalliance.org website to see the resources that we've pulled together for articles like that and others that can help them understand what else is occurring on the research front and how this paradigm shift we're all watching is going to impact the way that we all think about the link between soil health and human health going forward.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring up the microbiome, because it is a very hot topic, both in human health and in pet health. We've seen on the human health side of things, we've seen companies like Viome come out that are using mail-in stool samples to analyze the state of your microbiome and give you an update on your good and bad bacteria and what your kind of mapping your microbiome. We'll be doing an episode here on Petworking in a couple of weeks with Animal Biome, which is creating the largest microbiome data repository in the world for pet health. I actually just got my dog Peony's results back, and she has a very healthy microbiome. But I also know, yeah, it is. You know, I think though, I'm intelligent enough that I can grasp scientific things when they're explained to me. But I think, like a lot of consumers, I rely on people to, you know, tell me the why. Why should I care about this? And you know, I think anecdotally you hear, yeah, the health of your microbiome is influential for your overall health, you know, and is a big determinant in your overall health. And so when you see, you know, for me personally, that means, oh, I'm going to eat more yogurt. I'm going to give myself, you know, probiotics. And we certainly see those as buzzwords, well, not even buzzwords, but as messaging that has become central to a lot of pet diets, is that, you know, this supports digestive health. And the claim of supporting digestive health gets back to prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, and the impact on the microbiome and the digestive tract. I use a digestive health diet with my dog, and I was pleased when I got the results back. I was like, all right, good, this is working. But I think for a lot of people that, you know, it goes along the same lines. There's this understanding that, yes, this is good, but it doesn't get to the root of why. And I think what you're laying out right now with the, you know, soil health equals nutrient health equals overall health. That's what's so important. And I think what people need to realize here. Tina, I guess I would just ask, you know, as we look at this, what percentage, I know I've seen statistics that, you know, from a livestock perspective, you know, Jim Kleinschmidt shared during the conference that there are about 300 million head of cattle that are slaughtered conventionally every year versus, I think, around 30 million, or not even, no, 300 to 350,000 head of cattle that are raised on regenerative grassland. From an overall agricultural perspective, where are we at right now? How much farmland is being is under the stewardship of regenerative agriculture versus conventional agriculture at this point?
Yeah, there's over 900 million acres in the US. And even after 30 years of the organic movement, that's still less than 1% of farmland. Let's put it there. The non-GMO project and certified acres would probably expand a little bit beyond that. And the regenerative movement is really just getting started. So while the NRCS does have a soil health definition, which I think is important, and the state of California is working on a definition of regenerative agriculture, we have a lot of commitments. And so, you know, we could look to the fact that Cargill has a 10 million acre commitment, Pepsi has a 7 million acre commitment, Nestle has 14 million tons, or half of their supply web, committed to regenerative agriculture by 2030. General Mills has 1 million acres. But these are all in process, right? So they're all on-ramping each of these farmers in a way that works for the specific type of crops or the specific region or rainfall patterns that those farms are using. And so we're really at the beginning of this movement. You know, there's plenty of certifications that have come to bear. Some of them are organic plus, which, you know, you take that 1% of farmland and have the organic certification and bolt on some additional soil health and fair wage metrics and animal welfare metrics. But regenerative is really unfolding still. And so, you know, it's important in that commitment that it doesn't become just a back office corporate type program, but that it's actually integrated by farmers, understanding that it helps their farm for longevity, for passing it profitably to the next generation. That the younger generations that are interested in coming back to the farm are typically, they respond better to wanting to do either regenerative or organic farming, right? And so I, for one, am curious to see what some of the future demographics are that are going to come out of the recent census that occurs this year as it relates to farms, because last time it was less than 8% of people were 35 and younger were doing farming, right? And so there's a lot of conversion of farms and consolidation that's about to happen as people literally age out of that system. They retire, they get sick, or they decide that they can't do it any longer. And so the state of agriculture in the US and globally is in quite a bit of flux at the moment, as the previous generations that have long held that agricultural leadership are the ones that have essentially been backed into a corner from a profitability standpoint. And now the next generation is going, how do I make money if I'm taking on this debt, and also trying to do this farming the way that you did it, when all of the middle that they're paying to the input salesman is essentially where all of the profits going currently. So it's a whole bunch of economic and policy and age and generational questions that feed into this topic in a way that you and I aren't going to be able to resolve in a few minutes, but it helps to understand that that's how complicated a system it is behind the scenes. So giving farmers a carrot where they understand that moving to regenerative agriculture allows them to be profitable, irregardless of who they're doing business with, that's important. And it's also important to say that it's not a one-size-fits-all, magic wand. It takes real skill to understand what needs to happen for your own farm, your own soil type, your own crops, the crops that you're growing, et cetera. And back to what you were saying about the microbiome, one of my good friends who's an agronomist and a leading scientist in this area, Nicole Masters, has actually shared that some of the latest breeding techniques on plants, you could actually put them in the most biodiverse, naturally viable soil on the planet. And the plant has lost the ability to signal to that soil what it needs because it is solely reliant on those inputs. So it has to have the chemical integration in order to grow, right? And so getting back to heritage breeds that have not actually been bred away from the natural system is also kind of the critical behind the scenes work that needs to happen within the agricultural sector, so that we're bringing back those natural systems and the most beneficial biodiversity for human life outcomes and the microbiome that comes along with it in an associated manner.
Now, when you say, it's not a one size fits all model, and, some of this large scale farming has created plants that are resistant to natural methods of farming, it seems to me like regenerative agriculture almost harkens back, to an earlier time where it functions much better on a small scale. Would you say that's true? Is this something that is regenerative, something that, a large farm could adopt, or is this better for your smaller, local farmer? And, in the future, we might find that, it's much better to have small local farms that are engaging in these practices on, smaller acreage where it's more manageable, as opposed to trying to have, mass scale food production out in, at humongous farms in the Central Valley.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of a both and. So COVID taught us that regional regenerative farms are actually what we need. Less of this single lane food system where it's all been aggregated through one processing facility type of approach, or, a handful of processing facilities. And so even the USDA has given some indication via their announcements around the Farm Bill last year that they believe that regional and regenerative food systems are necessary for things like just the health of our food system going forward. Separate from that, though, the size of the farm does not actually, it doesn't have to matter. It can be large scale. In fact, there's a very famous farmer in Indiana, Rick Clark, who has 7,000 acres that he's farming regeneratively. And he will share that he didn't intend to be an organic farmer, but over the course of about 12 years, he ended up farming organically, and then said, hey, why aren't I getting the double premium that I could get for organic, even though he never saw himself ending up there. What he was chasing was soil health. And he was militant about removing the inputs that he was had been using, to a point where he started talking about saving $600,000 a year in inputs. I think now he talks about saving over $1 million a year in inputs on that 7,000 acres. But it became a hyper focused on soil biology and the natural life of the soil and the plants, and the interaction between the two for the mycorrhizal fungal community that actually feeds both the soil and the plant with those nutrients in that exchange that actually lead to what we would consider to be a nutrient-dense outcome. And so then like the Soil Climate Alliance, which is an initiative also of Green America, is system agnostic. So you don't have to be organic plus plus. You could be a conventional farmer looking to add cover crops and some additional practices for regenerative outcomes that meet the definition as told by, Rick Haney. Dr. Haney's soil test is one of the key standards within the regenerative movement via the USDA. And so, it's provable that this can be done at scale and that it matters for profitability and economics. And for anyone who's listening to this who may want more around the economics of regenerative agriculture, I can share that information at any given time. People are welcome to message me on LinkedIn and ask, but I've been saving that since 2018, all of the profitability information, because I think, having money as the carrot means that you can break down a lot of barriers. There's very few constituent groups that are interested in the economics or a beneficial economic outcome, right, for regenerative agriculture. And so having that be why farmers move into it, because they see their own agency, their own profitability, their own farm longevity, as opposed to a sharp corporate elbow in their ribs telling them they have to do it for Scope 3 emissions reporting and greenhouse gas reduction, right? It's kind of two different roads, but both are actually asking for the same practices. So there's a lot to give to farmers in this moment, a lot of hope to share, and it does not have to be about size or scale. These practices can be scaled for these outcomes, irregardless of size of farm.
Right. And just because it's, harkening back to an older method of farming doesn't mean there aren't technological developments that are in support of regenerative agriculture. I know I was talking with Corey Dobbs at Canada, and they had showed off at Global Pet earlier this year their partnership with Greenfield Robotics, and they have robots that will go through the fields and weed for you so that you can eliminate the use of pesticides. It's pretty cool. So while this is grounded in centuries old agricultural practices, it doesn't mean we haven't applied a 21st century lens to the issue.
Yeah, well, and roller crimpers and no-till drills are also two mechanical means that really help lead to farmers being able to practice regenerative agriculture. And so it doesn't all have to be, it's not a low-tech game. It's actually, there's plenty of tech involved in moisture probes and soil sampling and satellite imagery and all the ways that farmers are looking to prove that they're doing these practices. And then even on the nutrient density side, we have to prove via laboratory testing that there's actual, meaningful outcomes in the nutrition, which is typically along the lines of polyphenols, antioxidants, omega-3, 6 fatty acid ratios, and potentially higher protein in grains like wheat. So, there's a lot of tech at each point of this journey. And while people tend to think of it as being, maybe farming closer to 100 years ago, I would actually say 100 years ago, we didn't know the land had to have continuous cover. We weren't thinking through a biomimicry lens on how we actually imitate nature and the continuous cover and the natural cycles that nature has that feed our groundwater, feed our plants, feed our microbiomes, et cetera. And so, like, for example, I love using the scurvy argument of something, because there's some people who will say, well, if we don't know everything about how regenerative agriculture provides better nutrient outcomes, then should we wait until we know more to talk about it with consumers? And I find this to be fascinating because there's a few different arguments that come up frequently, and this is one of them. In the 1700s is when a doctor first discovered that citrus was actually meaningful for scurvy for sailors and started introducing citrus fruit. Do you know when it was, Peter, that we discovered what metabolic pathways actually make it so that citrus deals with scurvy? It was like 2008 before we actually understood why eating citrus really at a molecular level mattered for a scurvy protection or healing even. And so, we can't afford to wait a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades to let people know that these are the outcomes of these food systems. We need them to get in the game now for helping to drive that benefit because it matters for their own health, right? So,
we're already seeing the positive impacts that eating a regenerative diet can have, and that it can have, in terms of carbon sequestration and climate benefits and the water table. I don't know if there are many significant potential drawbacks out there, but it's just so interesting when, it seems like we're always waiting to implement things that are related to health or related to climate. And I think it's because you have very strong lobbying interests that want to see that the status quo is maintained. If you look at what's happening with AI right now, we have no idea of the potential negative ramifications that could come from large-scale adoption of AI, but everybody in the world is pushing ahead with AI as fast as they possibly can, and the consequences be damned. But when it comes to the climate, where we have very, very defined timeframes by which we need to make what are likely going to be some painful changes, something like regenerative agriculture, it just shocks me that you would hear, well, should we wait to study it more, right? Because it's what's it going to do? If we push through more regenerative farming now, it's going to create carbon sequestration benefits. It's going to create healthier individuals. Maybe there's a potential downside, but there's a potential downside to AI too. And it's just a very interesting equivalency there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and we never told consumers that their food was getting less nutrient dense over the years as it was occurring. So why would we hold back from telling them a way that it can become more nutrient dense as well? So, and one of the things I'll jump in with here, just so people understand a bit more viscerally what we're talking about, if you've ever gone to the store and you've bought strawberries that look like they're going to be perfect, they're red, they're juicy, they're beautiful, and you bite into them and they taste like nothing, those are strawberries that are lacking nutrients. Your body knows the difference. So when you're eating food that looks great but actually tastes like cardboard, that is food that was raised for quantity. It checked all the boxes for weight and color and size and lack of defects, right? That's what we've graded the whole food system on to this point. Grading it on nutrition and how intact that nutrition is when it reaches your shelf at your pantry at home is going to be some of the critical work going forward. And let me say one thing about the entity that's looking into that. The American Heart Association is actually at this table looking at the link between soil health and human health. And they're doing so in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. They have an initiative called the Periodic Table of Food. And that's mapping at a molecular level the top 1,000 foods on the planet, but also immediately looking at the human health impacts of the absence or presence of those bioactive compounds that we expect to see in foods. Furthermore, they're very conscious of the fact that we all eat 12 foods globally. It's like responsible for 75% of all the calories that we eat. What if there are foods that are eaten in the middle of Africa that are local to that region, are really highly eaten there and actually matter for carbon sequestration, water table, what have you, but are also highly nutrient dense? Should they be promoting foods like that so that those cultural heritage foods don't get pushed by the wayside as, advertising comes in for, processed food, right? And people then tend to think that, those are poor foods. Maybe I shouldn't eat those. I want to feel like I've arrived. I'm going to eat the processed foods. And actually, their heritage foods, the ones that match their cultural identity, may actually be giving them very specific nutritional needs that they have needed for a long time that the other foods don't. And so how do we actually help people categorize and understand that and take foods that could be good for everybody and help scale them so that we're getting away from so many of these monocultures, right? And a lot of those questions are being asked and answered right now.
That's really interesting. And I mean, and it would make sense, right? I mean, you see, and taking it back to pet food here, you see breed specific diets in pet food, and the nutrient and nutritional requirements of a Chihuahua versus a Great Dane are going to be very different, and similar, a Labrador versus a pit bull are going to be different. They come from different backgrounds. They have different cultural heritages. And we've done a lot of research on the pet food side of things to figure out, what are the unique nutritional needs that different breeds of dogs and cats have. I know I'm probably wading into a touchy subject here, but you brought it up, are the nutritional requirements of someone who grew up in Africa going to be different than somebody who grew up in Norway? And, you know, it has, you know, has that cultural experience created a different, you know, subtly different nutritional requirement that maybe we've let go by the wayside because these globally popular foods are promoted more.
Yeah, and I'm not the best person to speak to this by any means, but I think we don't have to stretch our hands very far to actually wade into this topic. If we look at even what Mexico is involved in the conversation with the U.S. government right now around their cultural heritage of corn versus having to accept imports of corn from the U.S. And you know, the changes in diet that they're looking at have been driven within Mexico related to processed foods and away from cultural heritage foods, and what that has meant for type 2 diabetes and other chronic and inflammatory diseases, right? And so, you know, that's an easy one for us to look up when people move away from their cultural foods that they have historically eaten for generations or for millennia, and move into a processed food category. It does come at a cost. And what's interesting about this is, back to Dr. Barabasi at Northeastern, he and his team last year published a peer-reviewed paper showing that unprocessed foods, so all fruits, vegetables, seeds, et cetera, all share, and this is fascinating, they all share a standard mathematical equation. And the more a food is processed, the farther it deviates from that standard mathematical equation. And so we now know, mapping foods at a molecular level, how to actually look at the math, if you will, of the makeup of that food, such that you can map how far away Cheez-Its are from, you know, an unprocessed food, for example. And they made a database of 50,000 foods to show what currently on grocery store shelves is highly processed versus minimally processed, and that they believe that that matters quite a bit for human health. So yes, all of these topics matter as it relates to nutrition and our hangriness and our you know, desire to eat things that are satiating and fulfilling, but also sweet, salty, and full of fat, right? And so, you know, just one thing I'll go back to real quick is, and I'll see if I can bring up the slide while we're chatting about it, because I do want to show it. That research that was done on the 768 people here, I found it. The 768 people who at this National Institute of Health article down here, yeah, that they shifted to a diet high in micronutrients and actually ended up eating less calories, right? And the UNFAO has actually been espousing this for about a decade now, that obesity is tied to that gap in nutrition. But what I want people to take away is hangriness can be eliminated by eating a high nutrient density diet. So if you feel like your hangriness is actually kind of, you know, overbearing in your life and you're looking to do something about it, actually switching to foods that are very high in macro and micronutrients might be a way for you to deal with that. And it's a very easy to read study using very approachable language for anybody that bothers to look it up. I would highly recommend it because it makes a serious change in the way that you think about the foods that you're eating in relation to your feeling, your sense of hunger.
Yeah, and when we think about, you know, tying all this back, you know, and I think one of the fundamental principles I've always operated under for the 15 years I've been consulting in the pet care and animal health space is that pet nutrition follows human nutrition. And so I think as we see people become more and more aware of the benefits of regenerative agriculture in their own life, it's going to be something that they want to confer to their pets. But, you know, thinking about what you're saying in terms of processed foods and the further it gets away from real foods, I think it does kind of lend some credence to the idea of, you know, gently cooked or lightly cooked, or the fresh refrigerated movement that we're seeing within pet food, is that, you know, these less processed diets are actually resulting in a lot of positive health benefits for dogs, even if they're just used as a topper in conjunction with kibble. Obviously, not everybody can afford to feed their pet fresh refrigerated food as the sole source of their diet every day. But, you know, even blending in freeze dried raw or fresh frozen refrigerated, in conjunction with a kibble that has, you know, digestive health benefits and is formulated to help the microbiome, can lead to better health outcomes for your pet. And then you combine this with the idea, of the carbon sequestration benefits, and you think about, that from a human induced greenhouse gas emissions, I think it's somewhere around 14-15% that comes from raising livestock, right? And that's both for human food consumption and pet food consumption. But I thought it was really interesting, at Impact Unleashed, where Dave Carter and Jim Kleinschmidt were highlighting the fact that, look, if you have livestock that is raised on regenerative grassland, you're creating a carbon sink. You're not contributing to carbon emissions. And then the other half of that is that you have a lot of those farmers that are raising their cattle or chicken, or, we'll use beef because I think it's the most tangible example, but they're having to pay to dispose of about half of the carcass. And that is meat that could readily be used in pet food. That's organs that could be used as palatants. That's, ears, that's tripe. It seems to me there's a huge unlock there. Let's try, we've got 70% of the meat in this country that's conventionally farmed. Let's transition some of it to regenerative, and let's get those regenerative farmers paid for the whole animal. And I think, we're not only going to see healthier pets, but we're going to see tangible carbon sequestration and climate benefits as well.
Yeah, and so it's the efficiency of that central slaughtering and packing system that's really missing. And there's several colleagues of mine that are working on this within the food system. I'll add a little bit to what you were talking about with regenerative trim, if you will. From a project last year, I can tell you that there is higher quality regenerative beef trim currently going into pet food and some of what goes into things like Meals on Wheels and community-based meals, because they're so cost-based, that they're focused on the lowest cost outcomes in order to stretch those community food dollars. And so when you think about it, where we stand with the regenerative trim and the fact that 50% of the animal is having to be paid to dispose of because there's no central efficient processing system to take the rest of that and actually utilize it in a pet or a human food system, because the largest efficiency players have removed that middle layer, right? And so this is where regenerative gets beyond just soil. This is why people will say you can't fix the current food system by only focusing on what's happening in the field. It has to also be about what's happening in these other systems as it relates to processing and utilizing the whole animal, and ensuring that the farmer is actually getting paid for the rest of that. And the inclusiveness of being able to include farmers that may have historically been excluded from these different systems as far as getting capital and being able to sell into them. All of those are part of solutions within a regenerative food system. So that's what people mean when they say regenerative food systems and getting beyond soil to include some of these other things within agriculture.
That is a lot to I think it's a really good point. How far away do you think we are from, reimagining this system to focus on and include, regenerative farmers and get, these systems reorchestrated, re-implemented, and getting, regenerative to a point where it can be used in something like Meals on Wheels or free and reduced lunch, because obviously, there's a huge unlock from a pet perspective, but I didn't even think about, the fact that, you might have higher quality ingredients in some pet foods than what we have in food assistance programs in this country.
Yeah. So where we're at, I think, is we're at the stage of hope. We have the Climate Smart Commodities grants, which was, a couple $2 billion that was paid to a lot of the companies that are practicing regenerative agriculture to help them with that implementation and the conversion of their food systems. You have mandatory greenhouse gas reporting as it relates to Scope 3 emissions, which is a bundle for people that don't work in that space, all to say that agriculture comes with emissions that have to be accounted for, especially by really big companies. And it doesn't matter if you're doing business in the European Union or in the US, if you're selling to Walmart, there's no escaping this, right? Or if you're invested in by BlackRock, or even if you're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, or if you have institutional investors, or you're impacted by the Green New Deal. The chessboard has been set to have this level of conversion and reporting and awareness take place for companies to understand what their footprint is, so that they then have to help be part of the solution to drive towards it. And so, you know, I have a lot of hope for the existing USDA, NRCS, and FSA leadership because of the longevity of the current USDA head, Secretary Vilsack, and the 8+ years of experience that he already had coming in, and understanding really where the fallacies were within the system that needed to be addressed in this go around. And beyond this next couple of years, I think we have to see what the political environment in the U.S. is going to be, because clearly there's now an anti-ESG movement, right? And so, you know, how is that going to play out in companies wanting to be public about the work that they're doing in order to help convert their supply webs, their sourcing opportunities into something that is providing climate benefits while also providing these human outcome benefits. And that's where I think nutrient density is a great delineator, because when you can prove that what you're doing is providing true human health benefits or animal health benefits as part of what other people would categorize as, you know, only climate decisions, you know, those things matter. This isn't we're almost at a point where it's not a negotiable thing. We have to make these types of changes in our food systems if we don't want them to continue breaking. And COVID showed us where those fault lines were, right? And so some of it's about how we position that. And I think the human health, nutrient density, animal health, you know, including pet health, those frames help us understand what's really at stake. And so I'll leave it there, because I think that's one of the most important points that I can make.
I agree, and I know we're getting to the end of our time here, and Tina, this has been wonderful. I really thank you for coming on. I guess I just, you know, to wrap it up, we started this journey talking about, you know, what's missing from regenerative agriculture is the consumer. And, you know, obviously we can look for regenerative agriculture on the label, but what else, you know, as consumers or even as marketers, you know, do you feel like we can do to help to drive this movement forward? I look at it as, if companies aren't going to enumerate the benefits of regenerative agriculture on their label, maybe we can be educating associates in, you know, natural food stores or pet food stores to talk about, this is why you should focus on regenerative agriculture. Is it as simple as getting the message out more and being impassioned advocates as consumers, or are there other things that you think we as the general public can do to drive this movement forward?
Yeah, I would love to see people who maybe aren't sure whether their pet brand is practicing regenerative agriculture actually just ping them on Facebook and ask them, right? So they know there's a consumer interest there. For those that are, maybe asking them for brands that are practicing regenerative agriculture, are they tying it to nutrient density, and how, as a consumer, can you understand what that means for, you know, nutritional outcomes? And as we mentioned, there are a few pet brands that are in this space that are looking at regenerative ag research and nutrient density. So they were Nutro, Halo, Spot Farms, which is owned by Purdue, Farmhounds, Solutions Pet Products, Canaday, which is going through a merge with another company, and also Fresh Pet. Just wanted to mention those brands are actively looking at the links between these two spaces. And as a consumer, of course, supporting those brands that are operating in regenerative agriculture is one of the surest ways to send a signal to the market, because then everybody looks at the sales of those products to see how much you're repeating your purchase, how long you've been purchasing, what your total basket is when you spend, right? All the economic metrics that matter for brands to invest in this space. And that's how consumers can really get involved right now.
Right. And I think, as you mentioned, you know, we are seeing it. We are seeing the Mars and the Nestle's and the General Mills, you know, of the world investing in regenerative agriculture. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. We are seeing that large scale investment. It may not be coming through in the marketing yet. It may not be there in terms of a specific brand message, although Nutro is a Mars company. So, there's one of the big four there that's already actively embraced it. And, as you said, General Mills made a, sizable investment in terms of regenerative agriculture acreage, and Nestle as well.
Yep. And General Mills has yet to link it to Blue, and Nestle has yet to link it to their pet brands as well, right? So Nestle has looked to link it on Gerber, their baby food brand, to tie nutrient density, sustainability commitments, and nutrition outcomes, right? So, some of the brands that they have in their space are coming along, but not necessarily all in pet yet.
Right. So I guess the takeaway here, folks, is look for regenerative agriculture on your label. Ask, if you're not sure that regenerative is being used in brands that you currently shop, either for yourself or for your pet, put the word out, ask for it. We're only going to drive this movement forward by letting people know as consumers that this is what we want, this is what we demand, this is what we need going forward, not just from a perspective of saving the planet and climate and benefits and carbon sequestration, but also for our health and the health of our animals. This is a win on both sides of the coin. And really, when you stop to think about it, there's no reason we shouldn't be doing this. So let's keep driving the movement forward and make life easy for people like Tina, who are out there on the front lines, educating people like me about this and getting more people aware of regenerative agriculture's significant benefits every day.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for the chance to talk about it today. I really appreciate it. Thank you
thank you so much for
bringing more light to this. Yeah,
my pleasure. Thanks, everyone. This has been another episode of Petworking. I really appreciate Tina taking the time to join us, and we will see you soon for another episode in the near future. Thanks again, Tina.